Okay, evening, folks. We're sitting on Thursday. It is about 9 o'clock, Thursday evening. Uh, we are on the home run to Friday and the weekend, so that's something to look forward to. What we're going to do, I was going to continue with the. Just bring the light down here. I was going to continue with the strap for the MP40, but I just want this paint to dry a little bit longer. I've just got a funny feeling that we've had a bit of humidity lately. Well, not humidity, but a cold weather, and then suddenly it got warm today. And sometimes enamel paint doesn't like that change in temperature. So we'll just leave it a bit, and we'll possibly tackle that tomorrow night. What I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to make a short vid of a little bit of an old technique that I like using. It's a pretty old school technique as opposed to what the guys do today, and that's called dry brushing. So I want to show you. This is a satchel, a map satchel that the captain would, the helpman would carry on his hip. In there would be his maps, etc., etc., and a few pens, etc., etc. And these were 9 times out of 10 they were made out of leather. So what we're going to do here, I've put the number 62 leather first coat on. I've put a second coat on. So now what we want to do is we want to bring the highlights out. We want to show that the little case is worn, got a bit of wear and tear, and all the high points on the leather case. You will notice that they will be lighter than the rest, because that's where they get worn, that's where they get rubbed against. As it's opened, it wears down, etc., etc., etc. So let's have a look at that. And you'll find a lot of guys, they tend to use techniques, what they call pin washing and washes and certain things, to bring out highlights and to, you know, there's quite a few fancy things around these days. And what these guys tend to do, they go after all these aftermarket liquids, or whatever you want to call them, or washes as they call them. Now, what a wash is when they take, it's essentially like an oil paint, and they'll thin it down to an extremely liquid form. So it's got the consistency of milk. Let's use milk as an example. And what they do is they then talk about a pin wash. So they'll take a little bit on the end of a loaded brush up, and they'll just dab the areas on the highlight areas, and then it'll run into the recesses and the creases, etc., etc., where there would be shadows or maybe dirt or whatever the case may be, or where the actual, like in this case, where the leather is darker, where it hasn't been worn. So that's what they call washes. Now, like I've said to you before, I'm not a professional. I also want to show you something quickly. I don't use a wash as such, but I've got a liquid, the thing that I use, and it's quite a bit of a stain. I'll pour some in here for you and I'll show you. It's quite dark. This is not a, it's just running down here. I don't like it. This stuff doesn't come off very easily, and I don't like using oil paints. I like this. And you know what this is? As you can see, look at the color there on the tissue paper. This is actually a wood stain. It's actually a mahogany wood stain. So what this does, it's pretty thin. You don't have to thin it. It's already thin. I just stirred it up, and then every now and again I'll use this on an area that I want to be dark, and I just drip it in there, and I'll also put up a video that shows where I use this wood stain. This to me works fantastic. It's pretty cheap, doesn't cost much, and I'm sure about, must have been about 4 or 5 years ago, I bought a 500 milliliter tin, which, let me put that back quickly, which we actually used for something else. And we used, you can see, look there, it's actually quite a, it does come off with thinners, but be careful with it, but it works damn well. It's fantastic. That's whenever I use a wash, that's what I use. You do get, I have got a lighter one, but I prefer the darker one. But if you're going to go that route, just be careful. Whatever that stuff drops onto, it'll stain, especially clothing. It'll stain permanently. Okay, let's get back onto our dry brushing. Coffee is all nice and hot, and it's quite a warm evening this evening in Ganubi. so it's not cold at all. So what we do is we're going to get a lighter color. I like to use my Humbrol paints again. I like to use matte 121. It's almost like a light earthy color, very very light sandy color. So what we'll do is we'll open that up. Let me put this down so you can see what we're doing here. Okay, that's his map. We're going to stir this up a little bit, and then we'll get onto this dry brushing. And once again, guys, obviously stir the paint and give it a nice stir. And I know you've seen this before, but I'll go through the processes and just part of the video. If you want to, you can always skip through this, but anyway, it's quite interesting at times for those that want to know about the actual painting side of things. But what we're going to do is we're going to use this matte 121 now to dry brush. That's the terminology, dry brush, that little map case. And like I said before, there are fancy things out there in the market, and sure, things have moved on with the hobby. And you'll notice with me, I'm very old school, and I like to use, like I've said before, things that I've got at home, and I'd rather save the pennies for kids. And you can buy all these fancy things, and a lot of guys don't believe in dry brushing. So they don't believe in dry brushing at all. They believe in just highlighting. They don't even like using pastels. And let me not get started on pastels. Let me show you. This is another favorite pastime of mine with this hobby. Is I love my pastels. These are pastels. I'll show you these here. These are my pastels. These are my grays that I use, and I use these a lot. What happens with these? I've got from white right through light grey to dark, and this is a chalk pastel, not an oil pastel. Obviously, oil pastel is not going to work. A chalk pastel. Now, what happens is you dust this chalk pastel off. You scrape it off. I scrape it off. I'll show you here, and it comes into a fine dust like that. And what you do is you take a brush. I normally get one of my older brushes, and I put that in there, and you actually take that and you can shade in areas. Now what I'll do is after the dry brushing, once I've done the dry brushing and the dry brushing is dry, instead of using a wash on a small item like this, because a wash, that dark wash on a small item like this might black this whole little map case out, and you don't want that. You want to see the highlights. I did something with some of you might have seen it on the Facebook page. This was it actually turns out it's not a Luger holster, it's a Walther P38, my correction. Those of you on the Facebook, but I know they were interchangeable at times. So this is one that I did, and it's in the details, folks. You know, a lot of people say, oh yeah, but it's so small you hardly even see it, and especially in 1/35th scale, that holster, if you had to do it in scale, you're not going to see it really. I mean, if you're standing 20 meters from a guy, you're not going to, but that's not the point. The point is, I know I want the detail there, so the detail is done. Same as this map case. So yes, you can. Some guys will say, why are you going with dry brushing? This, that. Just put a bloody wash on there, and then it'll go into the creases and the crevices, and it'll make the rest pop, as they call it. I don't know what pop is all about, but anyway, there it is. So what we'll do is we'll stick to our dry brushing. Those of you, if you want to use the technique, you're welcome. I love using dry brushing, and of course, I love my pastels. And then I'll just show you. I've also got what I call earth pastels. These are browns and a couple of blues. These are smaller ones, but they actually work quite well. These are also browns, and I love my pastels. I'll put a bit up me using pastels. That's also quite a nice little technique to use. Right, so let's get on to the dry brushing, and we'll take it from there. Let's have a look here. Let's just put that back there, and put these here. Right, so what we want to do with the dry brushing, what we want to do, get ourselves some paper here. You want to put that down. Okay, what you want to do here, you actually want to load your brush. Okay, so, oh, by the way, I meant to tell you first. Just wipe that off there, and I'll show you now. Nice flat brush, fairly firm bristle. I like to use a smaller one, especially. I've got a couple of them that I use for dry brushing. I've got bigger ones that I use on my tanks. A nice flat brush with it's fairly firm. This is a softer one that you use for much softer highlight. That's firmer. This is quite a firm one, and so I've got a couple of those. And then I also like to use what I call a fluffy. These brushes here. They're quite interesting. You guys should collect them and have a look. These are now makeup brushes, okay, that I've got from my wife, and etc etc. So they're quite nice. This is nice when you want to dry brush a very broad area, but I'll come to that at a later stage. I'll show you how that works. Okay, what you want to do with your flat, you want to load it up, okay, just there. You want to rub the excess off. Now a lot of people say, oh, that's wasting paint, etc 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 etc, and yeah, it might be wasting paint, but you're going to get the effect. Now what you want to do is you want to rub most of that, and just as you start seeing the color, that's what you want to do. I don't know if you can see it on the vid, you'll see it make a mark there, and you want to get it just as it starts seeing the color. Then what you do is get a bit of light down here, and you just want to gently put that down over here. You guys can see, you just want to gently brush, dry brush that. You don't want to dig it in, get the edges. You want to go over the top. You can already see it starting to, you want to dry brush it, you want to get it there. You want to get it, you just want to get the edges. You don't want to get too obviously on the edges where everything's worked and where it finds, and you can see already it's starting to show a bit of a feature, and you can see it start highlighting. The strap obviously will get a bit of work. That little buckle on there, I'll paint that up. That'll paint either in a aluminium, polished aluminium paint that I've got to give it a metal effect. So then we dry brush this up, and we have a look, and you see it's starting to get lighter, and it's starting to show some highlights now. Look at that. Okay, if you guys can see there, you can see that showing a bit of highlights. So that's not looking too bad. So that's, I just want to have a look under my light here quickly. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's looking neat. That's looking pretty neat. So we're just going to get the highlights there. Let's have a look at this. Let's just put this down here. Take this blast off my finger. That's from a scalpel cut the other night. Okay, so folks, as we can see here, if you can have a look there, just put a bit of light on that. If you can have a look, if you can see, let's just get that like that. If you can have a look there, I don't know if you can make it out, I'm sure you can. You have a look at that. Now you'll see the highlights have come up quite nicely. Now, when you present that in your model or your diorama or your scene, a lot of guys will say, but geez, this, that, and the next thing, look at that, dry brushing is this. Now what you do is, when that is dry, okay, that's not the end of the dry brushing. Now that's where your pastels come in, and you slowly use your pastels, and you blend in the shadows, and you blend in this, and you blend in that, and you blend in that. And then what I do is, I've got another little trick. Before I forget, let me just pour some thinners in here. Don't want that brush, I'm talking too much, don't want that brush to go hard. So let's just throw a dop in here quickly. A shot there. Okay. Just rinse that off a little bit. Let me just close that up for the time being. Okay, now I've got another little trick up my sleeve, because a lot of guys will say, okay, but hang on a second, you're dry brushing, now you're going to put pastels in there, a wash will do the same thing. Yeah, but a wash on that thing, on that small, even if you pin wash it, as they call it, I don't know what a pin wash is, but anyway, that's what they talk about, it's still going to run and intermingle, and there's a strong possibility that that dark wash will make this little bag at this size and this scale, it'll just blot the whole thing out, and then it's just going to look like a dark blob. You don't want that. So what I do is, also what I use a lot of the time, I've got these two markers. Okay, this is a 0.05 micron, you can see the tip there. Okay, so what I'll do is, I'll take one of these cards here and I'll show you. That's the line it makes. Okay, you can see that. So what I'll do is, I can take this as well, and then inside here I'll just scribe on the inside where the indentations are, and just highlight. When I say highlight, you're actually delighting it, you're darkening the shading areas, and then what you do is you take the pastel and go over that and you fade it in. Man, it looks good afterwards. But I'll show you how that goes. and then once this dry brushing is dried, we'll get on to that point. So these things are invaluable, these little Micron pens. I've got a 0.1 here as well, which is slightly thicker. I'll show that to you as well. You can see that on there. That's slightly thicker, so that's a thicker one. And they work well, especially when you're working on uniforms. Now, if you're getting onto a uniform, and look, figure painting for me, I'm still a novice when it comes to figure painting. So those are things that I'm learning in a big way with figures. But what I find with that, especially when you've got clothing creases like that, you take your Micron, especially the 0.05, and you just gently go into the creases there, and once you've finished your dry brushing and everything, your last step would be your pastel work, and then you just take the pastels and you just blend it in until you've got that natural look where the folds of the clothing, and you see the dark area, even if you look on my shirt, the dark area, and you use that to blend it in. But I'll show you folk how to do that when we get there. Okay, so that's a little bit of dry brushing, a bit of a quick video this evening, just to give you a little bit of background on the dry brushing. And then if you have a look here as well, I did this the other evening. This is on a ammo box or ammo container that contains an ammo belt. I've done a little bit of metal work there. You can see I've highlighted there a section, and this will be the radio that I've also done a little bit of work. You can see there the little metal showing through, highlight that with a bit of metal. So dry brushing that. So that's as far as the dry brushing is concerned. There are a lot of guys out there that will poo-poo that, and but for me that works quite a dream. And always remember, just try and use the nice firm flat brush. And once again, it doesn't have to be expensive. Okay folks, that's it. Enjoy it. Please like, share and subscribe, and thanks for watching again. Cheers.